First of all, I want to thank the Young Americans Foundation and the College Republicans for having me. I want to thank particularly the university for providing the level of security they felt was necessary for the event, so a round of applause for the security. Looking forward to having a nice cordial event where we exchange ideas and don't yell at each other and don't steal notes. By the way, if you do try to steal the notes, number one, I must warn you, there are a few people who may attempt to prevent you from doing that. And number two, I have hidden copies of my speech under every seat in this room. So you get a speech, and you get a speech, and you get a speech. Everyone gets a speech. Again, thanks to the UCONN administration for allowing this event to go forward. I only wish that their safety protocols extended to allowing members of the general public to show up. I know I got dozens and dozens, maybe hundreds of emails from people in the general area who were hoping to get in, were unable to do so. I had heard that by the time of this event, there were another 500 or 600 people who wanted to come at minimum, and it's unfortunate that the heckler's veto still seems to prevail. Anita Hill spoke here, I guess, in the last couple of weeks, and it was totally open to the public. Something has to be done about a system where a few crazed leftists decide they don't want to hear somebody speak, and therefore people from the outside who pay taxes to universities like this one can't get in. You know, that has to stop. This heckler's veto nonsense where if somebody on the left prevents speech, we all have to make sure that no one can get in from the outside. That really needs to end, particularly because free speech, I mean, this should be a shining moment for this university, not just because I'm so brilliant and I'm here, but also because it's a great thing that universities have people like me, and yes, like the person who's speaking opposite me on this campus, to give a variation of ideas. That's a wonderful thing, and it should be a shining example for universities around the country. It's just too bad that they won't share that with people in the community who are paying for it. So frankly, I'm always amazed a little bit by the amount of upset that my speeches cause. Apparently, I've heard that I'm a danger to the student body in some way, so much so that the university's Associate Vice President and Chief Diversity Officer, the most useless title in all of academia, sent a letter suggesting that students who feel threatened by my presence should reach out to the Cultural Center's, the Dean of Students Office, or the university's Office of Counseling and Mental Health Services. They actually sent a letter that said, quote, "We understand that even the thought of an individual coming to campus with the views that Mr. Shapiro expresses can be concerning and even hurtful." Wow. And that's why we wanted to make you aware as soon as we were informed. I mean, it's like a missile being launched from North Korea. We just have to put the alert system on Twitter. I agree, by the way. If you are so upset by my very presence on this campus, first of all, my guess is you didn't show up. Second of all, if you're that upset that you actually have to go to mental health services, I would just suggest that you probably need to see mental health services about a fair number of other things in your life. Speaking of which, of course, the College Democrats are holding an event simultaneously right now, which I'm sure has just the same number of people. This event, I guess, is dedicated to just debunking me. So there's some guy who I'd never heard of until like the last 5 minutes, who apparently runs a website that no one had heard of until he wrote a piece about me. So I am excited that I am a one-man stimulus package for academia. I'm creating an entire cottage industry of useless people who now have found a use, and it's just yelling about things that I say, so that's exciting. I have heard also that this person is a socialist, so I hope that they're getting paid. I hope this guy's getting paid, and maybe he can be drawn into the great market that is the United States, and maybe be cured of his foolishness. I do find it sort of amazing, by the way, that the left is so afraid of open conversation that they scheduled an event at the exact same time. And I think that they should totally have their event, and they should have their event yelling at me and all of them. It's great. But I would prefer that they actually come to this event, and then they can ask questions, because when we have the Q&A session, I have one simple rule. If you disagree with me, you raise your hand and you go to the front of the line. I prefer speaking with people with whom I disagree, not only because it makes for great internet fodder, but also because discussions are useful. I've spent my entire life in places like Los Angeles and Boston, places where no one agrees with me, literally no one agrees with me, and I have fun conversing about these views. I mean, it makes me sharper, it makes the person I'm talking to sharper, so everybody will have their shot, right? If you're on the left and you disagree with the stuff I'm about to say, then you'll have your opportunity. I just wish the College Democrats had participated in that rather than simply walking out, taking their ball, and going home like small children. And this is an upgrade, by the way, from what Antifa usually does. So I'm glad they're having an event and not trying to disrupt this one. I have a feeling that has to do with a couple of things. One, there's actually security. And two, it's really cold outside, and as a member of my security team told me, they are fair weather protesters. So apparently they wrote a letter to the student newspaper saying that I am a racist and ensconced in white identity politics, which is asinine. I've been one of the loudest critics of the alt-right in America for at least the last couple of years. I was the #1 target of the alt-right according to the Anti-Defamation League. I received almost 8,000 tweets in a 6-month period that targeted me in an anti-Semitic fashion. largely from the anti-Semitic alt-right. But apparently Antifa is upset particularly because I, quote, overlook the need for ethnic studies and diversity-related education in the United States. That's fair. And they should be angry. If we did away with useless college classes, how could they get easy A's that allow them to have jobs in useless professions at universities like this one? Now, make no mistake, I'm not saying that people of diverse backgrounds and orientations and races shouldn't be on this campus. They absolutely should. Everybody who's qualified should be on this campus, obviously. What I am suggesting is that if you are judging the quality of a group of people by the color of their skin, this makes you the racist, not me. If you're looking at a group of people and you say this group of people is better than that group of people simply by dint of the variation in melanin, then you're doing something wrong. There's something wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with me for suggesting there's something wrong with you if you are judging people simply by their group identity rather than as individuals. Okay, so today I want to talk about something slightly different. That is this pernicious phrase that's been going around. The phrase, of course, is your truth. So I'm getting very sick of this phrase. If anybody watched the Golden Globes, all three of you, then you saw Oprah Winfrey give the greatest speech in the history of mankind. I mean, the media it was the best speech anyone has ever given. It was better than all three of Churchill's great speeches from 1940. It was better than the Eddie Pretty Dress. It was better than Ronald Reagan's Shining City on the Hill. It was better than the speech that Adam Sandler makes in the Waterboy. It was better than all of it. It was so fantastic. It was amazing. And you know why it was so great? Because Oprah said that no one can stand against your truth. You see, you have a personal truth. Okay, this is absolute, not to define points on it, bullshit. Okay, the idea that you have a truth is not right. Okay, there's no such thing as your truth. There is just the facts and your opinion. Okay, you don't get to make things up and then call it your truth. And if you have a story, and your story can be verified, then it becomes the facts. If it can't be verified, it's your subjective opinion of what happened. Right? But this conflation between the facts and your opinion is really, really pernicious. Unfortunately, a lot of folks on the left don't want to hear this. They love this phrase, your truth, because it allows them to disguise their opinion as the facts. And more importantly, it allows them to disguise the facts you cite as your opinion. So if I cite a fact, it becomes my opinion. If I say something that I'm quoting the New York Times, it doesn't matter. If it conflicts with their feelings, now I'm speaking in the realm of opinion. I'm conflicting with their truth. So we're going to do a little exercise here. Okay, here's the exercise. I'm going to give you a list of facts on a variety of topics. These are all facts. These are not opinion. Okay, and you will see there will be some people who are very offended by these facts. There are people on the left who will be offended just by the fact that I'm saying facts, right? Just by the fact that I'm without even drawing a conclusion. I will reserve my conclusions about these facts until the end of the speech. But I'm going to give you a bunch of facts in a row, and people are going to get really uncomfortable. They're going to feel really difficult about this stuff, because here's the reality. If you base your opinion on the facts, this may force you to come to some conclusions you wish you didn't have to come to. The facts may conflict with your truth. So let's go through a few of these facts that make people uncomfortable. So there's a theory out there. The theory is that racial disparities in the United States are almost entirely due to so-called white privilege. The idea here is that America is a country that was built for the exclusive preserve of white men, and that white men have dominated it ever since, and therefore every disparity between racial groups, any statistical disparity between racial groups, can therefore be blamed on the history of the United States, and more specifically on the United States right now. Because obviously, some disparity can be blamed on the history of the United States. To pretend that discrimination hasn't existed in the United States would be foolish. Of course discrimination has. Of course discrimination against black people was rampant. I mean, there was slavery, there was Jim Crow. Of course that's true. But the question is whether white privilege right now is what is causing continued disparity between particular groups. So, let's give some facts. I'm not going to give my opinion. I'm just going to give you some facts. Criminologist Barry Lasser, in talking about crime and disparities in crime, from 1976 to 1995, blacks were identified by police as the perpetrators in more than half of all homicides. From 2000 to 2014, African Americans were murdered 8 times as often as whites per capita, nearly always as a result of black-on-black assaults. 57% of blacks in state prison were convicted of violent crimes. And other facts. The Justice Department under Bill Clinton found that blacks had a lower chance of prosecution than whites in 75 major American cities as of 1994, which would seem to contradict the viewpoint promulgated by the left that blacks are being prosecuted in outsized numbers and convicted in outsized numbers. Professor Peter Moskus of John Jay Criminal College of Criminal Justice at CUNY found, quote, adjusted for the homicide rate, whites are 1.7 times more likely than blacks to die at the hands of police, which seems to conflict with the opinion and it is an opinion, that the police are out there targeting black people in disproportionate numbers. A widely publicized study in July 2016 from Harvard professor Roland Fryer, who happens to be black, surveyed over 1,000 police shootings and found that black suspects are shot less often than white suspects in comparable situations. In 2015, the cops shot 987 people. A huge majority of those people were armed or threatening deadly force. Blacks represented 26% of those shots. Well, police officers are nearly 19 times more likely to be shot by a black male than an unarmed black male is to be killed by the police. Hey, how about the idea that black people are disproportionately in prison because of drug crimes? Well, the truth is that nobody is really disproportionately in prison because of drug crimes. The vast majority of people in jail are not there because of drug crimes. Just 16% of state offenders, state prisoners, were actually convicted of drug offenses across the United States. Most of those drug offenses involve distribution, not merely holding. So the idea that police are just willy-nilly breaking into people's apartments and then prosecuting them while they're smoking a joint is not true. Just 3.6% of state prisoners across the nation are in for simple drug possession. Most of those people pled down their original charges from distribution. Fully 71% of poor families with children are unmarried. So the idea that black people are disproportionately poor because of racism, there's not a lot to go on to suggest this. Okay, the idea that black people are disproportionately poor, or continue to be disproportionately poor, would be more specific. Because of racism, the truth is intergenerational poverty can be predicted in large part by one key fact: unmarried motherhood. Okay, the poverty rate among non-married white families was 22% in 2008. The poverty rate among black married couples that same year was 7%. So what happened to all the racism? And as for the idea that all racial disparities are the product of racism, this would neglect the fact that the highest earning group in the United States of America are Asian Americans. Okay, now there's another theory that folks on the left like to tout, or an opinion folks on the left like to tout, that women are victims. Women are victimized in the United States. Women are having the roughest time of all in the United States. We need women's marches. We need to walk around wearing bizarre pink hats that represent the vagina for some unknown reason. We can't say why we're there. We can't say what we're protesting. All we know is that knit caps are awesome. Okay, so let's go through a few facts. Number one, women are not paid 77 cents on the dollar for every dollar a man makes. That's for they're not. You don't have to applaud facts. This is the nice thing about them. They just are, right? Christina Hoff Summers, friend of mine, professor, she writes, the bottom line, the 23-cent gender pay gap is simply the difference between the average earnings of all men and all women working full-time. It does not account for differences in occupations, positions, education, job tenure, or hours worked per week. When such relevant factors are considered, the wage gap narrows to the point of vanishing. Actually, young childless women often earn more than men. Here's from Time.com reporting in 2010. According to a new analysis of 2,000 communities by a market research company in 147 out of 150 of the biggest cities in the United States, the median full-time salaries of young women are 8% higher than men in their peer group. The new study suggests the gap is bigger than previously thought. Young women in New York, LA, San Diego make 17%, 12%, and 15% more than their male peers, respectively. And it even holds true in smaller areas like Raleigh-Durham and Charlotte, North Carolina, or Jacksonville, Florida. How about the idea that women are being they're victimized by a rape epidemic on college campuses? This is trotted out as a reason to march because presumably women are being raped willy-nilly at college campuses, just like this one. You walk outside and the rape truck is just going. It says free hugs on the side of it. It's just okay, the fact is that number one, as I always say, I will inject a bit of opinion. Rapists should be castrated or killed. Okay, with that said, the idea that there's a rape epidemic happening on campus is pure fantasy. This idea that 1 in 5 women is raped on campus is utterly a lie. It is not true. It is based on a survey that conflates everything from attempted forced kissing with sexual assault. So a guy goes in for a kiss, you turn your cheek, this is now the equivalent of rape, according to these polls. Professor James Allen Fox of Northeastern University and Richard Moran of Mount Holyoke College point out the estimated 19% sexual assault rate among college women is based on a survey at 2 large 4-year universities, which might not accurately reflect our nation's colleges overall. Also, the survey had a large non-response rate, with a clear possibility that those who had been victimized were more apt to have completed the questionnaires. It wasn't even a scientific survey. Here is the real statistic. According to the Bureau of Justice Statistics, a violent victimization of college students report, from 1995 to 2002, there were 6 rapes per 1,000 per year. Okay, so that's a difference between 200 rapes per 1,000 per year and 6 rapes per 1,000 per year. In case you were wondering, the numbers have dropped since 2002. They have not increased since 2002. How about the idea that women in engineering, this is all happening because of discrimination in engineering? Now, there may be some discrimination in engineering. There may be people who don't want a woman working in their department, but overall, it is career choice that determines where people end up in a free society. It turns out that women do not want to work in engineering as much as men want to work in engineering, and men don't want to work in nursing as much as women want to work in nursing. There are vast disparities between the sexes regarding particular populations entering a specific occupation. Right? Teachers are disproportionately women. Men are disproportionately firefighters. Is this because of sexism, or is this because it turns out that women and men like different stuff? If you don't believe that women and men like different stuff, by the way, meet a person of the opposite sex one time. Harvard psychology professor Steven Pinker, who is no right-winger, explains pretty clearly, differences between the sexes are part of the human condition. The fact that I have to say this demonstrates how stupid everything is. And how about the idea that women are victimized when people like me say that they are anti-abortion? This is some imposition on them. And what I really want to do is shut down their freedom, because that's deeply what I'm concerned with. I spend my days worrying about what you do with your esophagus and also with your uterus. This is just what I do. Okay, nonsense. And the reality is that people who are pro-life because they believe that life begins at conception, and the fact is that life does begin at conception. Whether you think that life is valuable enough to trump a woman's quote-unquote right to choose is another question. But there is no question that life itself begins at conception. Professor Jaime Gordon of the Mayo Clinic says, quote, by all the criteria of modern molecular biology, life is present from the moment of conception. Professor Micheline Matthews-Roth of Harvard Medical School, quote, it is incorrect to say that biological data cannot be decisive. It is scientifically correct to say that an individual life begins at conception. Okay, another opinion that's put out there, another your truth that's put out there. If you're poor in the United States, it's because you're a victim of the system. Capitalism makes people poor. Absolute nonsense. Absolute nonsense. Okay, the upper middle class in the United States was 12% of Americans in 1979. Today, it is 30% of Americans. So income mobility means that people may not be in the middle class anymore because they're now in the upper middle class. As for poverty in America more generally, the poor in America are the richest poor people on the face of the earth and in human history. Pew Research points out the U.S. stands head and shoulders above the rest of the world. More than half of Americans were high income by global standards. Another 32% were upper middle income. 9 in 10 Americans were upper middle income or upper income by global economic standards. Only 7% of people in the U.S. were even middle income, and only 2% were poor. According to the American Enterprise Institute, by the way, the idea that the rich are sucking the lifeblood out of the poor, that they're not paying their fair share in taxes, American Enterprise Institute, quote, the highest income quintile is financing 96% of the entire system of transfer payments to the bottom 60% and funding the operation of the federal government. How about the idea that if you're in the top 1%, you are getting richer, but everybody else in the lower 99% is getting poorer? This makes no sense because people change in and out of the 1%. I've been in the 1%, I've not been in the 1%. At some point in the future, I will probably not be in the 1% again. Okay, as you change in life, and right now, all you college students, the vast majority of you are not in the 1%. By the time that you are 10 years from now, 15 years from now, hopefully you'll put your degrees to good use and you didn't major in poli-sci, and now you're actually going to be able to get a job and be in the 1%. Okay, as Thomas Sowell points out, by the way, income discrepancy varies largely by age. Households headed by someone 65 or older have more than 15 times as much wealth as households headed by someone under 35, because if you've been living a long time, you've been accruing wealth a long time. And as he points out, this is not because people who enter the 1% are evil. Everyone who is 65 was once 35, it turns out. So also points out, a University of Michigan study showed that most of the working people who were in the bottom 20% of income earners in 1975 were also in the top 40% by some point by 1991. So if you start off at the bottom, you can move to the top in the United States. It's one of the wonderful things about the United States. How do you do it? It turns out it's not that tough. According to the Brookings Institute, you only have to do 3 things to not end up in permanent poverty in the United States. Finish high school, get a full-time job, wait to get married to have kids. That's it. You do those 3 things, you will not be in permanent poverty in the United States. And everyone is capable of these 3 things. Virtually everyone. Okay, finishing high school, let's face it, the high school system in America, that means basically you know how to read the word cat, and you have to be spotted the C and the T. You want to graduate high school in the United States. Getting a full-time job, jobs are widely available, and waiting to get married before you have children, which to me is the most inexcusable decision that people make. It just means don't put that thing there without that other thing on it until you're married, you morons. Institute says, of American adults who follow these 3 simple rules, only about 2% are in poverty, nearly 75% have joined the middle class. Okay, now we get to the most controversial portion of the evening, and that is facts about transgenderism. So this, of course, is what the left is very upset about, because every time I say that a man is a man and a woman is a woman, and a woman can't magically become a man, and a man can't magically become a woman, and no, I will not call you a woman if you are not a woman, and no, I'm not going to describe you as she if you are not, in fact, a biological she, people on the left get very uptight. So I will reserve my opinions on all of this until the end, although you just heard them, but I will. I'm going to give you some facts now. Okay, these are not disputable facts, for the most part. Okay, so if you dispute the facts, you can cite the studies and you can argue with the authors of the studies. I'm going to give you facts that come not from me, but from studies and from medical literature and from reviews, and then you can argue with those. Okay, this is undisputed. There are 2 sexes. There are not 9. There are not 11. There are 2. Okay, if you have a Y chromosome, Y chromosome, then you are typically male. People without a Y chromosome are typically female. We all learned this in 5th grade biology. Variation may exist in a tiny percentage of the population. This would make you intersex. It would not necessarily make you a person of the opposite sex. Okay, transgender advocates, however, don't even care about the biology. What they claim is that no evidence must be shown of any chromosomal anomaly in order for you to claim that you're transgender. I can be a full-on XY male, a full biological male, and if I say that I am a female, you must now call me she. I am a transgender person, and you must call me she. Right? In order to achieve this bizarre conclusion, transgender advocates have to create a new category different from sex, because obviously this is not going to work. You can't fool anybody by saying that a woman is a man, a man is a woman. So instead what you have to do is you have to create a new word, right? We'll call it gender. Right? We'll call it gender. Gender, in their view, is about maleness or femaleness, right? These social constructs of maleness or femaleness, an entirely subjective category, not linked to biology. But separating maleness or femaleness from genetic influence is scientifically illiterate, of course. To say that a biological male is a gendered female is a basic contradiction in terms. Right? A biological male is a gendered male. He may be an effeminate male, he may be a feminine male, he is still a male. Right? And it's very easy to prove this. Okay? If a man were to experience some sort of accident that changed his hormonal balances, it would not make him a woman. Right? Whether or not he identified as a woman. If a man had an accident, and for some terrible accident, he got injured in the genitals, and suddenly he didn't have male appendages anymore, this would not make him a woman. This would make him a man who experienced a terrible accident. Okay, a biological male may have feminine characteristics. He is still a biological male. Richard Lippa writes in the textbook, Gender, Nature, and Nurture, quote, some researchers have argued that the word sex should be used to refer to the biological status of being male or female, whereas the word gender should be used to refer to all the socially defined, learned, constructed accoutrements of sex, such as hairstyle, dress, nonverbal mannerisms, and interests. However, it is not at all clear to what degree differences between males and females are due to biological factors versus learned and cultural factors. Okay, other facts about transgenderism that are inconvenient for transgender advocates to mention. First, the idea that transgenderism is a condition that cannot be changed, and that people do not change with regard to their own views of their own biology and with regard to their views of their own sex is not true. The vast majority of children who claim to be transgender when they are children, pre-puberty, do not end up being transgender when they grow up. And according to University of Toronto professor James Cantor's studies, 2/3 of children who feel transgender outgrow their desire to transition sex by puberty. Another recent paper by endocrinologist Paul Cruz, biostatistician Lawrence Meyer, psychiatrist Paul McHugh puts that number at 80%. Transgender advocates also claim that transgender suicide rates, which are extraordinarily high, which is just an incredible tragedy. By the way, when I'm saying all this, the reason I'm saying all this is because I think facts matter, not because I don't have sympathy for people who are suffering from something that really is, it must be truly terrifying, must be truly difficult to deal with. What I'm suggesting is that we need better solutions than blaming society for this problem, because the problem is not with society in large measure. The problem is largely with a mental condition. Transgender advocates claim that transgender suicide attempt rates, which run at about 40% over the lifetime, which is extraordinarily high. Suicide attempt rates in the United States, among other populations, run at about 4%. That they are a result of discrimination, which results in depression. A study from professors at the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention and the UCLA School of Law Williams Institute found 46% of transgender men, which is women who believe they're men, and 42% of trans women, men who believe they're women, attempt suicide over the course of their lives. The study also does point out allegedly high levels of discrimination against people. And no one is in favor of discrimination against trans people. No one is in favor of treating trans people badly. I just did an interview with Blair White, who's a transgender woman, meaning a biological man who believes he's a woman. And the interview was all about whether I should use pronouns that Blair White wanted me to use, whether I should call Blair White a she. It was a very cordial interview. I explained my position and everything was fine. We can agree to disagree on these particular points. If it makes you suicidal because I say that you are your biological sex, my suggestion is that there is something deeper going on than merely what I am saying to you. By the way, the linkage between quote-unquote bullying or disagreement and suicide is not proved at all in wide varieties of population. Right? If the idea were that people who are bullied commit suicide at a higher rate, you would assume, for example, that the black suicide rate would be incredibly high because racism against blacks still exists in our culture. The black suicide rate is significantly below the white suicide rate in the United States. In fact, suicide seems to be a privilege of the wealthy. If you go to poor countries, suicide rarely exists. It's really only in rich countries in the Western Hemisphere where you see high suicide rates. Okay, how about the idea that discrimination, though, is causing the suicide? Well, the same study from the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention and the UCLA School of Law investigated people's suicide rates if they were identified as a member of the opposite sex or a member of the sex to which they claimed membership. Okay, so the suicidality rate among transgender women who say people identify them as transgender regularly is about 45%, according to the study. But the suicidality rate among transgender women who say they are occasionally or never identified by others as transgender is 40%. Right, so in other words, a man who believes he's a woman, goes through all the surgeries, has all the hormone treatments, and no one can even identify this person as a woman, still has a suicide attempt rate of 40%. And the suicidality rate among female to male transgenders is identical, whether or not people can identify them as transgenders. The evidence that transgender surgery, by the way, mitigates suicide risk is mixed. It is mixed. There are studies that say yes, there are studies that say no. A 2004 review of more than 100 international studies by the University of Birmingham found, quote, no robust scientific evidence that gender reassignment surgery is clinically effective. A cohort study from Sweden, released in 2011, covering sex reassignment surgeries from 1973 to 2003, found that transgender surgery recipients were still 19 times more likely to die by suicide than the general population, and stated that, quote, sex reassignment, although alleviating gender dysphoria, may not suffice as treatment for transsexualism. So, everything that I just said, these are all facts. You can argue with the studies, you can argue that the statistics are not right, but you actually have to argue with why those are wrong. You can't just say that my opinion is wrong because my facts are wrong. You need to argue that the facts are wrong themselves. Okay, you actually have to argue with the facts. Now, here are my opinions. You may have gotten hints of them throughout the speech, but here are my clear opinions based on this. You can even argue with it's fair for you to argue with the conclusions I'm drawing. You can say that the premises I'm laying out do not lay to these conclusions. You may say that the facts that I'm laying out aren't sufficient to reach these conclusions, and then you have to explain why. What you don't get to do is say, I don't like your opinion, therefore I will ignore all of your facts, right? My truth is more important than the facts that you cite. Here are my conclusions. When it comes to racial disparities, race does not cause crime, obviously. Right? Culture causes crime, which is why poverty tends to correlate very highly with crime, regardless of population, but is not the same among all population groups. Right? Disparities in arrests by race are not evidence of racism. If you want to stop the criminal disparity rate, all you have to do is something simple. Stop as individuals committing crimes. Okay? This is the best way to fight disparities in the crime rate. The police only respond to calls that a crime has occurred. Okay? That means that if you stop committing crimes, you are going to be arrested less often. Continuing and widening disparities in racial wealth are connected to decision-making. Okay, it is true that when it comes to history, okay, that black people in the United States, because of all the discrimination, start off at a lower point wealth-wise than white people in the United States. Of course, that's true. But it is also important to note that there are groups that have come to the United States with nothing and are in the top income earners in the United States. Right? The fact is that, as I mentioned, the highest income earning group in the United States are Asian Americans. When my great-grandparents came to the United States in 1907, they literally had nothing and didn't speak English. And now my parents did well, my grandparents did well, and I'm doing well. Right? The idea is not, does history leave people differently off? Because that's always been true. Right? There are always different populations that are worse off or better off under any regime historically. The question is, what do we do right now to make your life better? And sitting around and saying that history has made things bad for me does not solve anyone's problems. You have to identify the problem right now that needs to be solved. If you're not identifying the problem that needs to be solved and suggesting solutions for those problems, you are part of the problem. Because now you are saying to people there are obstacles that you as an individual cannot overcome. Okay. How about female victimhood? So here's my opinion on female victimhood. Women are not victims in the United States. This is an asinine contention. Women in the United States are the best off women in the history of mankind, and it is not close. When it comes to men victimizing women, we are with you. My problem with the Me Too movement is not that they are calling out bad men doing bad things. More of this. Name them. Okay, I want to stand alongside you and say that these men should go to jail. And I'm as clean on this score as anyone in American public life. I was a virgin until marriage. Okay, I Do not hang out with women who are not my wife. I'm of the Mike Pence mindset when it comes to this stuff. And the fact is that I want to see men who mistreat women. I was brought up like this. I have 3 younger sisters. Men who mistreat women are the worst people on planet Earth, and they should pay the worst penalties on planet Earth. But it doesn't help anybody when you conflate systems of people who are oppressive with people who you just don't like. Right? When you come out and you say that Aziz Ansari is a sexual abuser or a sexual assaulter because you went on a date with him, performed oral sex on him, and got naked in his apartment twice, and then you say, oh, he took it the wrong way, and the next morning you say, oh, well, I didn't feel good about that, I'm not going to treat you the same as the lady who was raped by Harvey Weinstein. Sorry. Right? This is not oppression of women. This is called having a rational standard for behavior. As far as the argument that women are victimized by people like me who say that women should bear the children they conceive, the answer is because I think the child has value, not because I'm trying to oppress you. I don't care what you do with your body at any other time. I do care what happens to the child that is inside your body. And it would not matter whether that child was outside your body or inside your body. I don't think that you should kill babies. On income, here is my conclusion from the facts that I have cited. You are not tied to your class in America. You can rise, you can fall. Your power is in your hands. No one is standing in your way. If someone is standing in your way, you need to name the person. If there's a policy standing in your way, you need to name the policy. Don't just say that society is barring you from succeeding, particularly not if you're going to a good university like UCONN. Don't tell me that people in America are standing in your way and telling you you can't succeed. No one gives a damn about you. No one cares if you succeed or not. And that means also that the bad news is no one cares about you. The good news is that because no one cares about you, no one cares about stopping you. No one cares. So go out and do your best to make something of yourself. You're not a victim. And then finally, on transgenderism. Great sympathy for everyone who's suffering from this. It does no good for a society to lie about sex in order to supposedly make people feel better. Lies are not a path to virtue, nor a path to sanity. Truth is a path to both of these things. This does not mean you can't treat people with cordiality. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't have manners. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't be kind to people. It does mean that it is an imposition on me to ask me to lie about the nature of basic biological facts because it is going to offend you. And my friend Jordan Peterson did a great interview in Britain the other day in which Jordan specifically was asked about this. This woman asked him, why does your right to free speech trump my right to be offended? And he said, because if it doesn't, there is no right to free speech. And because people are saying things that offend each other all the time. This is how we get to truth. Right? Here's my other opinion on this. Pronouns have always applied to biological categories, not subjective states of mind, or even outward appearance. The idea, by the way, that pronouns should be applied simply to outward appearance would make every Bugs Bunny cartoon ever really ridiculous, right? Every time Bugs jumps into the dress to try and seduce Elmer Fudd to get him to leave him alone, you'd have to call Bugs a female bunny. That's not how this works. To claim something that is objectively untrue as reality is not fact-based thinking. To insist that you're a man and to insist that a falsehood is a fact is delusional. If you're a man, you're a biological man, you claim that you are in fact a woman, this is not true. Okay? It's just not true. You may feel like a woman. I don't know how that would even operate, considering that if you're a man, I don't know how you would feel like a woman. It's like saying that I, as a man, could feel like something completely different. I feel like a chicken. Like I can't feel like a woman. I'm not a woman, right? I can feel like maybe I don't belong in my body, but it seems like you're jumping to an identity that you've never actually occupied. But this delusion corresponds to significant levels of depression and suffering, which is why I have said that gender identity disorder is a mental illness and should be treated as such, rather than being foisted off on society as some sort of flaw in society that we could all fix if we just started using preferred pronouns. There's not enough evidence to support that position by any stretch of the imagination. Now listen, as I say, you can argue with any of these conclusions, but you will have to explain why the facts that I cite are either incorrect or why they do not lead to the conclusions that I have stated. Some people, however, are so deeply offended that they feel no need to offer an argument. Instead, they just claim offense. They claim that they're victims, and now they win the argument. You don't need to play this game, because it is a game, and it's a stupid game. They claim I'm just being offensive, or I microaggress them, or I'm invading their safe space. Okay, facts are not microaggressions. Facts are facts. No space should be free from facts or safe from facts. Those who insist that I respect their truth, they don't have any truth. They have opinions. Those opinions often oppose truth. I am far more justified in ignoring opinions unsupported by facts than they are in dismissing facts that support my opinion. Okay, we can't have a conversation without a common basis in fact. If those facts offend people, so be it. I can live with that. Facts don't care about your feelings. Thanks so much.